accurate. So let's pass the bill we sent over, the clean CR, for 6 weeks. Let's go to a budget conference. Let's resolve our problems. This is too great a country to have us suffer like this, a self-inflicted wound that doesn't have to be done. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Republican whip.
Mr. President, if you need evidence that there is a parallel universe in America today, on one hand, Washington, D.C., and the bubble that seems to surround this place, and the rest of America, if you need evidence of that parallel universe, all you needed to do is listen to the comments of the Majority Leader this morning, who said, in the presence of these folks in the gallery here in the United States Senate, he said the government is shut down. The government's shut down. Well, that's clearly false. And you know what? There are a lot of Americans who think that Washington is a train hurling down the track out of control. And who can blame them? When they look at our national debt, $17 trillion, more than $50,000 per every man, woman, and child in America. When they see our unsustainable programs like Medicare and Social Security, which the Majority Leader and the distinguished Senator from California hold so dear, we do too. We believe those are important programs, so why wouldn't we want to try to fix them? And the most amazing thing that I heard today is the Majority Leader said that Obamacare is sacrosanct. It's the law of the land. You can't touch it. Well, over the last 3 years, the Obama administration has repeatedly and unilaterally issued waivers, granted exemptions, and announced delays relating to this sacrosanct law known as Obamacare. And since when is it beyond the power of the United States Congress to change existing law by amending it or repealing it or defunding it? It's absolutely unprecedented to have a Majority Leader of the United States Senate, someone who knows this institution as well as anyone, to say that Congress is powerless to act when our constituents tell us they want us to act because they don't believe Obamacare will perform as advertised. And the best evidence is the unilateral actions of the President of the United States, who've granted waivers, exemptions, and delays for his preferred constituents. Meanwhile, the rest of America has to live with this monstrosity that it will not work as advertised. All you have to do, again, is compare the President's promises to what's actually happened. He says if you like what you have, you can keep it. Well, that's not true. Millions of Americans are being dropped from their employer-provided coverage into the exchanges that they don't want to be on because they'd prefer to have their employer-provided coverage. When the President says the average family will see a reduction in their health care premiums of $2,500, well, that's not true because they've actually gone up on average $2,400. And for many young people like my daughters, they're going to have to pay more, so my generation will have to pay less, even though they don't need the government-approved gold-plated health care plan or want it or can afford it. And we know that Obamacare is, in the words of some of the leaders of organized labor, it's doing permanent damage to full-time work because people are being moved from full-time work to part-time work in order to avoid the employer sanctions. And it's doing damage to our broader economy. All of us have listened to the small businessmen and women who we work for, who are our constituents, who say, we can't afford Obamacare, so we're not going to hire more people. In fact, we're going to cut back in order to avoid some of the sanctions associated with it. Or you know what, at some point, I'm tired of working for the government instead of working for myself and my family, so I'm just going to close up business and shut her down. And yet, despite all that, the Majority Leader has the temerity to come on the Senate floor and say, this is the law of the land, we can't touch it, It's perfect, couldn't be better. That's like whistling past the graveyard. Senate Democrats have refused to make any changes whatsoever, even in those provisions that they themselves believe are flawed or defective in Obamacare. They're refusing to abolish the medical device tax, which is a job killer and kills medical innovation that saves lives, even though 79 senators, Republicans and Democrats alike, voted against the medical device tax on the budget resolution. They're refusing to delay the individual mandate, even though the President of the United States has done for businesses a one-year delay in the employer sanction, yet Democrats voted against delaying the individual mandate for average Americans. How can that be fair? And most remarkably, when it comes to the Obamacare exchanges, Senate Democrats have towed the line, or you might say walked the plank, last night at the instance of the Majority Leader, and they refused to treat members of Congress the same as all other Americans. That's what one of the votes we had last night did. If I were Democrats running for re-election in red states in 2014, I would be very worried about that. This is a toxic vote for them because Americans, although they may not be able to quote Federalist 57, they know what it says in their hearts and spirits because it's fundamental to our democracy. And that is, members of Congress should not be treated differently, certainly no better, than the rest of America when it comes to the law of the land. So those who cast that vote, who walked that plank last night, will be held accountable in the 2014 election. But you know what? I believe all of this points to the fact that the Majority Leader and President Obama really want a government shutdown, because they're reading some of the polls that say that they think this will benefit them politically, but they're willing to risk a shutdown of the federal government just in order to gain political advantage. Now, I'm not so sure about that. I certainly did not believe that a shutdown, it was not my first choice. I thought surely cooler heads would prevail when it came to the individual mandate, when it came to the medical device tax, when it came to eliminating the special carve-out for Congress. Surely we could find some common ground somewhere when there's plenty of evidence that the President and his administration have acknowledged the flaws and the defects and the unkept promises of Obamacare. Surely we'd find somewhere we could find common ground. Our colleagues in the House have now passed multiple bills to keep the government open and allow Obamacare to remain funded, even though clearly our first choice is to repeal and to replace this devastating legislation which is killing jobs, running up costs, and falling out of favor with even its most ardent advocates like organized labor. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party, from the President of the United States to the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, to all Democrats in this body, they have become the party of no. No compromise, no negotiations, no changes. It's all perfect. We wouldn't change a thing. Life is good. But the government shuts down. And invariably, some people get hurt. The President of the United States was thinking about holding a meeting of congressional leaders at the White House. The report in one of the newspapers here in Washington is Senator Reid, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, shut it down. The President wanted to demonstrate some leadership. He should demonstrate some leadership. People expect leadership out of the President of the United States, but Harry Reid shut it down. And so Harry Reid shut down the government and got what he wanted. I think it's about time that the President overrule Harry Reid. He was elected by the American people. For many of us, he was our second choice. But he is the President of the United States. He needs to demonstrate some leadership. Instead, the Democrats have doubled down on their strategy, hoping to gain political advantage at the expense of the people hurt. Well, a shutdown was not my first choice, but there are many of my constituents who are calling me and telling me, look, we're worried, we're scared about our future. We're scared not only about our ability to find jobs, we're scared about our children and their future. Now, Mr. President, my generation was a beneficiary of the sacrifice and hard work of the greatest generation, the World War II generation, people who risked everything so that we might have a better life. So I'm hearing from a number of my constituents back home saying, look, we're willing to risk some hardship if that's what it takes to get the American people to wake up and to get the Democratic Party to wake up and to get the President to wake up and say, we need to work together and fix these problems that we all know exist: the national debt, lower median income, unsustainable Medicare and Social Security, for which the Democrats offer only higher taxes and more regulation. No wonder the economy is growing so slowly. And then the triple whammy, which is Obamacare, which is killing jobs and hurting the economy. We can do better than that, and we certainly should by working together. Now's the time for the President to call that meeting in the Oval Office. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Missouri.
Well, Mr. President, I'm disappointed that the process has failed us in the last week. For my friends in the House and the Senate who, like I did when we ran for these jobs, said we'd do everything we could possibly do to not go down this path of where government gets between people and their doctor. Those are heartfelt views. Those are sincere views. Those are views that if we were in the majority, frankly, and if we had a president on our side, we would have already taken care of. But for those who mistakenly thought that if we didn't have any appropriations bill, that somehow the president's health care plan wouldn't move forward, we see today that was a mistaken view of what would happen. Most of the president's health care spending is mandatory. It's something that the Congress doesn't even vote on. The way not to move forward is to change the law. But, Mr. President, we've not had any opportunity to change this law. Didn't have an opportunity when you and I served in the House together to change the law. This is a law that never was amendable on the floor of the Senate or the House. Now, it's hard to imagine that we have decided to restructure 1/16 of the whole economy and everybody's health care relationships without ever having a chance to amend the law. So surely, my friends on the other side who voted for this bill or who have been supportive of this law, surely they understand the frustration that we have when there's never been a possibility to bring an amendment to the law and say, let's see if we couldn't make this part of it work better. So what was the amendment yesterday? The amendment yesterday to the law that the House offered the Senate, the principal amendment was, let's not have the individual penalty for a year. The President on his own decided we wouldn't have the corporate penalty for a year, that wouldn't have the business penalty for a year. This is sort of a strange place for us to wind up. We're on this side of the Senate, we're saying don't give job creators, we like to talk about job creators on this side of the Senate aisle, don't give job creators a break and not give people working at those jobs a break. The President on his own apparently can amend the law without us. Now, this is also pretty unusual, Mr. President, that the President on his own, without us, thinks he can amend the law, but we have no avenue to amend the law. The President on his own said, we're going to eliminate the corporate penalty. We're going to say that for this first year, businesses that have more than 50 employees don't have to offer insurance or pay a penalty. That's what the law says was supposed to happen on January 1. But the President said, no, we're not going to do that. That's too hard to do. We're going to take a $12 billion hit in funding this program because that's what the estimated penalties might have been. And frankly, that may have been low because a lot of businesses that were offering insurance, I think, will not be offering insurance when we get into the requirement to offer insurance. And so I think that was probably a low number, but it was a number. It was $12 billion. Our friends in the House sent something over here that said, okay, if we're going to waive $12 billion, let's waive $4 billion. Let's waive the penalty for individuals if they don't have insurance. And by the way, many of those individuals were led by this law to believe they'd get insurance at work. But the President said, oh, there's no penalty for not offering insurance at work for this first year, but we're still going to penalize individuals who don't have it. So if you're an individual out there and for whatever reason you can't afford, don't get insurance, you're going to have a $95 penalty the first year, and it goes up after that. That was a chance to amend the law in the right way. The House would have voted, the Senate would have voted, the President would have signed a bill. Imagine that. The House votes, the Senate votes, the President signs a bill. I think that's the way the process is supposed to work. And how we could have a $12 billion waiver for the employer and have a $4 billion penalty for the employee just doesn't make any sense to me. This law was not amendable, so sure, would it be better not to be amending it, trying to amend it on a resolution to support the government? Absolutely, that would have been better. Would it have been better for the Senate to pass a single appropriations bill of the 12 that are supposed to be passed before the spending year begins? Absolutely, that would have been a lot better. Would it have been better for the Senate to prioritize anything? Now, Senator Mikulski, the chairman of my committee, the Appropriations Committee, was mentioned earlier. The committee voted out most of the bills, some of them on a partisan vote, some of them on a bipartisan vote, but only one of them got here, and it was one the leader knew couldn't possibly pass. So we haven't passed one bill. Would have been better to do it that way. We wouldn't be at this moment if, in fact, we had passed the appropriations bills and agreed with the Senate. And then the majority leader talks about the hardworking chairman of the Budget Committee and says, we can't do our work because we don't have a budget conference. Well, last year the majority leader was saying we don't even need a budget. Now we can't. It's too late for the budget. The spending year has begun. That was months ago when that should have happened. And why didn't that happen? Because the House passed a budget that obeyed the law. And the law says we can't spend more than $967 billion. That's the law, like it or not. Just like on my side of this discussion, Obamacare is the law, like it or not. Now, apparently that's a law we have to enforce, but we don't have to enforce the Budget Control Act because the Senate budget was over $1 trillion, $1,038 billion was the Senate budget. Of course you're not going to have an agreement if you're 70 or 80 billion dollars apart and one budget obeys the law and the other doesn't. Of course you're not going to have an agreement on that. Republicans in the House essentially for a week now have been negotiating with themselves because there's nobody who's willing to negotiate. The President says negotiating on the debt ceiling is blackmail. Never been blackmail before. In fact, we wouldn't have the Budget Control Act if we hadn't negotiated on the debt ceiling. So it's blackmail to negotiate. You know, this is a process where actually the House, the Senate, and the President are supposed to work together to move forward. The budget, the debt ceiling has been used over and over again to talk about spending. It's been used a number of times to talk about things that weren't spending. And usually by Congresses controlled by Democrats with Republican presidents. And they say, well, okay, the President doesn't want to talk about this issue without the debt ceiling. We're just going to add it to the debt ceiling discussion. But more often than that, it's been used to talk about spending. If you go to your banker and said, I've spent all the money you've given me, I've used up my line of credit, I'd like to extend the line of credit, I guarantee you your banker's going to say, well, either no, you've already exceeded what we told you you could borrow from us to spend, or if we're going to do that, let's talk about your spending habits. Well, show me a plan that means you're going to spend differently in the future than you spent now. But the President says that's blackmail. More than anybody else in the United States of America, the President of the United States is in a position to look at what he's for and figure out what he's for that the Congress would be willing to do. That is not happening. That has not happened. There is plenty of blame for the fact that there's no funding today, but there are also plenty of victims of that. Everybody who depends on the government is a victim of that. Social Security checks are going to go out, but you can't apply for Social Security if you don't have it. If your check is lost or didn't go out, you can't find out why that happened. People in harm's way, the border control agents, the immigration and customs enforcement people are out there, but their paycheck for their family's not coming in. And how could we have solved that yesterday? One of the ways we could have solved that, I'm confident, is by saying, okay, we won't collect this $4 billion from individuals, just like we're not collecting the $12 billion from companies. The reason this health care law continues to be such a problem is it was never amendable, it was never discussed. Even the President says, as he does some of these unilateral things, if this was a normal circumstance, I'd go to Congress and ask them to change the law, but it's not a normal circumstance. I can't find that anywhere in the Constitution where the President gets to decide if the Constitution applies or doesn't apply. Everybody is to blame here because the Congress is not doing the work the Congress is supposed to do, and the President's not leading, and Americans are going to suffer because the Congress and the President haven't done their job. I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. As my colleague from Missouri just said, as we are on the floor today, much of the federal government has been shut down. It's shut down because of the Democrats' unwillingness to compromise on keeping the government open and delivering fairness to all Americans. While employers got a pass from the President on his health care law, the American people still face a mandate that they start signing up for Washington-approved health insurance, and the exchange is open today. The House of Representatives took the reasonable and responsible step of keeping the government open while eliminating the health care law's unfairness. The unfairness that refuses to delay the individual mandate for a year but does delay the mandate for businesses, and the unfairness of refusing to eliminate special exemptions under the health care law for members of Congress weren't in the health care law at all. But yet the President has granted special exemptions that I believe show the unfairness of the approach by the Democrats. President Obama saw that other parts of the health care law won't work, weren't ready. He's currently signed 7 different bills repealing and defunding other parts of his law. He should, as an interest of fairness, deal with these parts that are seen all across the country as very unfair. The President's allowed exemptions and changed the laws for specific groups. He's delayed the employer mandate for a year. The question is, why does he oppose delaying the individual mandate for a year as well? Why do the bosses get an exemption but not the workers? That's what someone asked me at a health fair in Lovell, Wyoming over this past weekend. The American people already know that the health care law is unaffordable. They know it's unworkable. They know it's unpopular. Now families are also saying that the health care law is unfair. The House has asked us to treat all Americans fairly, but the President and the Majority Leader refuse to do that. If you look at their rhetoric over the past week or so, Washington Democrats seemed eager for a government shutdown. Well, they got their wish. Meanwhile, the administration is still promising people great benefits from the new government-run health insurance exchanges. So today, hard-working Americans get to see which promises are kept and which have been broken. I think what people are going to learn today can be summed up in 2 words: buyer beware. Here's how the Wall Street Journal put it yesterday. Front page article: late snags on eve of health rollout. The article says the Obama administration officials scrambling to get the health law's insurance marketplaces ready to open on Tuesday keep hitting technical problems, while government-funded field workers across the country say they aren't fully prepared to help Americans enroll in the program. Mr. President, the reports out today in the news show system failure across the country as the exchange goes live. Because remember what the President said in his address to the nation just Saturday. He said they're opening on Tuesday no matter what. No matter what. They're opening today. Well, I think that the people across the country are going to have more than just technical problems. First of all, people are going to see higher costs, significantly higher costs. Just last week, the President promised to give Americans, and I will quote him, high-quality, affordable health care, he said, for less than their cell phone bill. Now remember, the average monthly cell phone bill is $71. Well, in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the least expensive plan for a 27-year-old person can buy will be $271. The President said less than 71. Why is it $271 a month in Cheyenne, Wyoming? And that's for a healthy 27-year-old. So before the health care law, before the exchanges, they could buy a plan like that for $82. Now $271, a lot more than a cell phone bill. Now, the White House isn't even disputing anymore that prices will be higher for many people. Now the White House is arguing that consumers will spend more, but they'll get, as they say, better insurance. The administration is also saying that prices are going up less than they had previously estimated. So they previously estimated they were going to go up a lot. Now they're estimating they're not going to go up quite as much as a lot, but they're still going to go up. So a smaller increase isn't what the President promised. He said families would pay $2,500 less a year. That's what the President promised. It's not what's happening. Prices in the exchanges are up all across the country. In California, the cheapest plan at the silver level will cost a 40-year-old in Los Angeles $240 a month. That same person, because of something in the law called community ratings, that same person buying the same plan in Sacramento, California, would pay $330 a month. As I see the astonishing looks on faces of folks in this chamber, they can't believe it. They say, how can it be true? Well, maybe, perhaps, Mr. President, they should have read the law, read the bill before they voted to pass it. 38% more in Sacramento than in L.A. for the same identical policy for the same 40-year-old person. So in addition to the higher cost of insurance premiums, there are also higher out-of-pocket costs. There are higher co-payments, higher deductibles, all things that are going to make people look at this and say, cheaper than your cell phone bill? Not a chance. All of that means more money out of the wallets of hardworking Americans and more sticker shock. The second thing that people are learning today as they sign up in the exchanges is that many of them will actually lose their doctor. I practiced medicine for 25 years. I know how important it is for patients and having a long-term relationship with their caregivers. The exchanges, the mandates coming out of this President's health care law break that bond. That's because insurance companies needed to find ways to keep rates from going even higher. So what they've done is limited the doctors and limited the hospitals that patients can visit. In New Hampshire, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield is excluding 10 of the 28 hospitals in the state from the exchange. A young mother may not be able to keep seeing the pediatrician who she knows and trusts with her children's care. Now, that wasn't supposed to happen. The President promised that if you like your doctor, you could keep your doctor. Today, many Americans are finding out that that's just not the case. On Sunday, just a few days ago, on Sunday, Howard Dean, the former head of the Democrat National Committee, he has admitted that one of the unintended consequences of the law is that small businesses, he said, are going to dump their employees into the exchange. The people who work at those small businesses don't get to keep the insurance that they had, and they may not get to keep the doctor that they had either. A third thing that people are going to start to see today as the exchanges open for business is that there is a definite risk of fraud and identity theft. How can that be? Well, the administration has hired so-called navigators, people to help enroll consumers in the exchanges. Turns out that these workers aren't well trained or even subject to consistent background checks. Even the Obama administration has been warning that con artists will take advantage of confusion over the law to steal people's identities. As I said earlier, buyer beware. Security may also be inadequate in the giant government data hub. Now, these are the huge databases of detailed personnel information about everyone in the exchanges. The information will be available to people in many different government agencies, and the whole chart of all the different places that this data is going to be sent all throughout government. The administration promises that the data hub will work, but they will not talk about what they've done to ensure that it is secure. Finally, we know that today there are going to be a lot of customer service system failures. President Obama said that buying insurance through the exchanges, he said, would be like shopping at Amazon.com. Well, it's shaping up to be much less consistent than that. Instead of simply clicking a few buttons online, many people are spending hours following up with phone calls, emails, and faxes. Faxes? As recently as 2 weeks ago, government software couldn't reliably tell people the correct price for their insurance. Late last week, the administration delayed enrollment of some of its small business exchanges. Washington, D.C. said last week that parts of its exchanges also weren't ready. In the state of Oregon, state officials say the software problems will force them to delay their website. People there will have to find other ways to get help signing up. Mr. President, that is not how Amazon.com works. That is not what the President promised. Now, it didn't have to be this way. The American people knew what they wanted from health care reform. They wanted lower cost and more accessible quality care. President Obama could have drafted a law that actually addressed Americans' concerns. Instead, he forced through a law making health care more complicated, more uncertain, more expensive. Now is the time for the American people to hold the President to his promises. Coverage in the exchanges, as he said, should cost less than your cell phone bill, be as easy and secure as Amazon, and let you keep your doctor. How well those promises hold up will be the real legacy of the Obama health care law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President,
Senator from Wyoming.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the time be equally divided among both parties.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, yesterday when the President of the United States addressed the American people, he was very clear about what a shutdown would mean. He said, quote, office buildings would close, paychecks would be delayed, vital services that seniors and veterans, women and children, businesses and our economy depend on would be hamstrung. Business owners would see delays in raising capital, seeking infrastructure permits, or rebuilding after Hurricane Sandy. Veterans who've sacrificed for their country will find their support centers unstaffed. Tourists will find every one of America's national parks and monuments, from Yosemite to the Smithsonian to the Statue of Liberty, immediately closed. And of course, the communities and small businesses that rely on these national treasures for their livelihoods will be out of customers and out of luck, close quote. I share the President's concerns about what will happen to the American people, about real people, as one of my colleagues put it yesterday, during and in connection with a government shutdown. I want to focus our attention in the coming hours and days on these people. I think it's also important that we continue to focus as well on those who are already hurting for reasons that don't have to do with this shutdown. And so I'd like to turn for a moment to people who are, and for a number of months have been, already feeling the negative effects of another government policy that the President and his allies in Congress staunchly defend. Obamacare happens to be the #1 job killer in the country. A recent analysis documented hundreds of businesses that are cutting back hours to avoid the crushing costs of Obamacare's severe mandates. As a result, major unions have said that Obamacare could destroy the 40-hour work week, the backbone of the American economy. People are losing their health insurance. Just a week ago Friday, 20,000 people, employees of Home Depot, were informed that they would be losing their health insurance. UPS is no longer going to provide health insurance for spouses of employees. And the grocery store chain Trader Joe's has dropped health coverage for part-time workers altogether. For everyone who's been furloughed by the government shutdown, the change hopefully will be temporary, perhaps lasting a few days, maybe even a few hours, if the Democrats decide to negotiate. And for everyone who's lost their job, seen their hours cut, their wages reduced, or who no longer receives health insurance, the change could well prove to be far more permanent. Do we not have an obligation to do something for those people? I think we do. So let's look for the path forward. Let's return to the President's concern about those who are hurt by a government shutdown. One positive and encouraging step was taken yesterday in response to action taken by the House of Representatives late Saturday night. Late Saturday night, of course, the House of Representatives passed a bill to ensure that all active duty military personnel, the brave men and women in uniform who serve us bravely, will continue to get paid. Yesterday, the Senate took up that measure and passed it unanimously. It did so in a matter of minutes, in a seemingly effortless legislative act. I think we can do the exact same thing with a number of non-controversial spending bills that fund aspects of government that Americans overwhelmingly support, Americans acknowledge that we need, and that are completely unrelated to Obamacare. My plan, in other words, would involve setting up segmented continuing resolutions, appropriations measures that would keep the funding going at current levels to various areas within government, including the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, military construction, CJS, which includes funding for the Department of Justice, the federal court system, the FBI, NASA, and the National Weather Service, for example. and also the U.S. Department of the Interior, which includes our national parks. I mentioned national parks here with special interest because today, the first day of what we hope will be a short, quickly resolved government shutdown, we've got at least 2 honor flights coming in from around the country, bringing World War II veterans, members of the greatest generation, to Washington, D.C., who plan to visit the World War II Veterans Memorial, a memorial designed specifically for them. When they arrive, if nothing changes between now and then, they'll painfully discover what we've learned this morning, which is that those parts of the National Mall have been fenced off and barricaded. They won't be able to get in. They won't even be able to get very close. This is unfortunate, and just as importantly, it's unnecessary. We can act, we should act, we must act today to resolve this. There's absolutely no reason why this non-controversial aspect of our federal government's operation should continue one more day, or even one more hour for that matter, without being funded. This is an effort to compromise, an effort that is badly needed, an effort that comes in the wake of other efforts to compromise that have, for the most part, failed. The House of Representatives has tried now 3 different times to avoid a shutdown, passing 3 different measures to make sure that our government would continue to be funded. Senator Reid and those members of his conference, those who support him, have rejected all 3 plans, rejected all 3 offers to keep the government funded, accusing Republicans of playing games with Obamacare. So in light of that, let's leave Obamacare for another day and not hold the vast majority of government functions hostage when the vast majority of government functions don't have anything to do with the implementation and enforcement of Obamacare. We did it yesterday. We did it, and it worked well. It was seamless. It was done with absolute unanimous consent. We did it with respect to active duty military pay yesterday. We can do it for veterans' benefits, for border security, for national parks, and many, many other government agencies. We can keep government open. We can keep those aspects of our federal government funded. We can do so. We should do so. Together, we will do so. And I look forward to having these discussions in the coming hours to make sure that we can continue to work together as colleagues. We may not agree on everything, but in those areas where we should agree and where we, in reality, do agree, let's keep the government funded. Thank you, Mr. President. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from Utah.
ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to have the time during any quorum call to occur right now, that the time during that call be equally divided between the 2 parties.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Quick recap of the Senate this morning. The Senate voted to reject the latest House Republican effort to negotiate on the budget, amend the government shutdown. Party line vote was 54-46 this morning. The Senate turned aside a House request to name negotiators to a conference to resolve differences. Majority Leader Harry Reid said he wouldn't negotiate as long as Republicans were holding up a straightforward spending bill to keep the government operating. The vote marked the fourth time that the Democratic-controlled Senate has rejected House Republican efforts in this fight. The most recent federal government shutdown until today happened in 1995 and 96. It lasted a total of 26 days and cost about $1.4 billion. Now we want to show you how we got to this point. Here's some of the House debate from last night.
Pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on September 30th, 2013 at 10:00 p.m. that the Senate disagreed to the amendment of the House to the amendment of the Senate to the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59. Signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 368, resolution relating to consideration of the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar, ordered printed. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 368 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 63, House Resolution 368, resolved that the House hereby, 1, takes from the Speaker's table the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, with a House amendment to the Senate amendment thereto. 2, insist on its amendment, and 3, request a conference with the Senate thereon. Section 2, any motion pursuant to Clause 4 of Rule 22 relating to House Joint Resolution 59 may be offered only by the Majority Leader or his designee.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of the debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentlewoman, my friend, the ranking member of the Rules Committee from New York, Mrs. Slaughter, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
Mr. Speaker, during consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
House Resolution 368 directs the House of Representatives go to conference with the Senate to resolve differences between the two chambers on how to appropriately fund the federal government. Like any other time the House goes to a conference, Mr. Speaker, the minority will have an opportunity to instruct conferees and have their ideas heard. For nearly 3 weeks, this body, the United States House of Representatives, has made numerous legitimate efforts to find a compromise to avoid a government shutdown. Unfortunately, Senate Majority Leader, Mr. Reid, and Senate Democrats have been unwilling to negotiate and have stonewalled any attempt to find common ground. No one wants a government shutdown, but Mr. Reid's unwillingness to work with House Republicans to find a solution is what brings us to a point now this evening. I know that we want to get our work done tonight. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. Yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for as much time as she wishes to consume.
Thank you, sir. Let me be clear. The proposal before us is nothing but another way to run out the clock. I think while we're speaking here, just a little while, we will find in 20 minutes and 21 minutes, because I think we'll go 1 minute after midnight, that this government will shut down. This amazing government that we are supposed to be overseeing, America, United States, can't manage its business and shows to the rest of the world that over the fact that trying to stop a bill you hate, that is the law of the land, that has been already verified by the Supreme Court as to its constitutionality, and where our president won election handily when this was the main idea. I don't believe anymore that this is the product of a few people with strange ideas. This is the Republican Party. I think people who have the news gene that I do, that every idle moment I have to be finding out what's going on in the world, was quite stunned to watch a caucus or Republican conference over and the members coming out absolutely gleeful, many of them expressing glee. One of them said he was almost giddy with joy about closing down the House. Earlier this evening, I saw after the 2010 election some new members who were saying, this was again on news, that their intention was to shut down the House. Well, they've done it. Any time we could have taken up a clean bill from the Senate, all we had to do was vote for that Senate amendment resolution and pass that here, which could have done easily with bipartisan votes. It would then have gone to the President of the United States. And government workers could sleep easier tonight if we'd done that. They're not going to have to worry about paying the rent, or going to be able to buy groceries, or be able to pay the tuition for their child in college. What we are doing to the psyche of America, not we, I'm not going to say that again, the universal we, what the Republicans are doing to the psyche of America will be a long time in healing. I think the absurdity knows no bounds, and we want to say again that if anybody has any mistaken notions that the Democrats were involved in this, there are no Democrat fingerprints on any of these bills. I say that again. Democrats had no input at all at any time on what any of these bills were going to say in the greatest manner before the House of Representatives to keep the government going, to meet our obligation to fund the government. In fact, by cutting out the people's representatives on my side of the House, almost half the people in the United States, voices were stilled throughout this whole process. The only time we got to talk was when we were up here, and we were trying to run to catch up to see what was going on. We had no idea what this was about, that this was coming tonight. We were able to pick up bits and pieces maybe off the floor and hints, and people passed around some things that maybe they heard, but the whole Democrat side has been shut out, not just on this measure, but almost everything in the world that we have done in this term, and it is in last term as well. Now, I don't want anybody to forget that, because everybody's going to yell, if something goes wrong here, they're going to try to blame it on us. It's not on us. I've never seen anything like this. And in addition, for well over 6 months, this Democrat side has begged, cajoled, done everything that they could to try to get this House to appoint conferees and to go to conference with the Senate of the United States on bills that each chamber had already passed. We couldn't do the farm bill. We can't do much of anything. And I said earlier today one of the reasons is sequestration, so that when we got through one or two appropriations bills, they'd run out of money, and there was no way in God's earth we could have ever done the 12 that we needed to do. But even that hasn't caused any idea of changing what we're doing. And we want to be a part of that. We would like to take the 6 weeks, and imagine in one hand we're appointing conferees for a 6 weeks measure, when we wouldn't do it for the budget of the federal government. Now, we would like to be as much a part of it as we can. We're trying to deal with the debt limit, and certainly to do away with the sequestration that even my friend Mr. Rogers, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, said was far too draconian, and that this government would be seriously underfunded. But tonight, here we are, tragically here, and let me see now, it's 15 minutes and away from time where it will be useless. So I'm not going to say anything more about we could take up another bill, we could pass it, we'd go to the president, we'd sign, we could avoid it. It's simply too late. And if anybody believes this was not the plan, how could you, with any common sense at all, think that as we have moved inexorably to this point, without changing from the left to the right, we're moving ahead, throwing up every kind of thing on a clean CR that would kill it when it arrived at the Senate. And we're hearing, and maybe I hope it's not true, that when we get to the debt limit in about 2 weeks, that the Christmas list that they want to pass, everything that they wanted all their lives and couldn't get, again, holding the country hostage, is what we have ahead of us. Now, given a clear choice between serving our country and serving our ideology within these ranks, the majority has chose to stand against the country and shut the government down. Make no mistake about it, there is going to be a lot of hurt. But at this point, all I can do is urge everyone on our side of the House to vote no for no other reason because of the rules of the House being broken and regular order being so far from reality. In fact, this rule, the rules of the House say that any member can call for a vote on the Senate bill. But this rule takes that away from everybody but the majority leader. Only the majority leader can call for that vote. Very little is left to our side except to vote no and to express our great displeasure and hope to goodness that when this is over and all that pain is out there, that we can move as quickly as possible to try to right this dreadful wrong that is about to land on the American people. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from New York reserves her time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, I hope we really find a way to avoid that by agreeing to a conference. I think a conference is important. The United States House of Representatives will be on a vote here in a few minutes where we're asking for that. I believe the American people see what we're doing is trying to legislatively resolve the differences that we have. As you know, Mr. Speaker, our first CR was a clean CR at sequester levels and simply defunding Obamacare. Our second CR was a clean CR at sequester levels with a 1-year delay of the entire Obamacare law. And the third CR was a clean CR with 1-year delay of the individual mandate and removal of certain benefits for members and congressional staff. I have, during these times, found that some of the wise counsel that I have received in the deliberations that I have had and the duties and responsibilities as the chairman of the Rules Committee leaned upon several people. One of them is here, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Hal Rogers. Hal Rogers has provided me, and I hope I provided him some bit of working knowledge of what we were trying to accomplish, a desire to accommodate House and Senate members to complete more work on appropriations. That is still a part of the goal that we're going to tonight, to go to conference so that we can fund the government and get it done right. And, Mr. Speaker, this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Kentucky, the gentleman of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Rogers.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Chairman, thank you for those kind words. And it's likewise. I have relied upon the gentleman for advice all through this process as well, and I appreciate his leadership in this body, especially as chairman of the very important Rules Committee. The Senate has just rejected the House's third attempt to avoid a government shutdown. This body has voted time and time again to keep the lights on in our government and to stop the train wreck that is Obamacare. Unfortunately, our colleagues in the Senate have rejected these offers and have refused to come to the table to find a solution. To be absolutely clear, the House has debated and approved 3 separate continuing resolutions. these bills do what they are named for. They continue government. We do not want a shutdown, and we've done what we can to avoid it. Given the situation at hand and the late hour, we will now vote to send the CR we just passed and a request for a conference to the Senate. Our challenges are great, but they are not insurmountable. This conference will provide a venue to discuss the differences between the House and Senate, have productive negotiations, and come to a final agreement that most can support. In some ways, Mr. Speaker, this is a logical next step. When the House and the Senate are unable to resolve their differences on other pieces of critical legislation, the appropriate action is to appoint a conference. That's the time-honored way of this great body. I understand that this is not the first or the second or the third choice of many members here tonight. It's not my first choice either. But I believe this motion can help us move forward and provide at least a gleam of light at the end of this very long tunnel. I urge an aye vote, and I yield back and thank the chairman for the time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, a member of the Committee on Rules, Mr. Polis.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, as we watch this train wreck in slow motion, this Republican shutdown of government, I ask myself, in trying to understand what the Republican majority is doing, why are they seeking to close down government? Is it because some of them are against government and want to see it closed, and I think it's been quoted this is exactly what they wanted? That might be the case for a few of them, Mr. Speaker, but I don't think most Republicans want to abolish the United States of America government. I think that's a position that very few Republicans hold. So why are they closing the government? Now, I understand that many of them don't like the health care reforms, the Affordable Care Act, a law that was passed by the House and Senate, signed by the President, upheld by the Supreme Court. It's the law of the land. Some of them don't like that. You know what? Some Americans